It's me, the brilliant Dr. Robotnik. Sonic may have thwarted my plans to conquer the world last time, but I'm back and more dangerous than ever with Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on the Sega Genesis. Sonic and his pet squirrel, Tails or whatever, don't know what's coming for them when they try to verse me and my prize creation, the Death Egg. This game slices, it dices, and it'll be the place I wipe that stain of a needle mouse off the face of the earth. So buy it.
Released for the Sega Genesis on November 21st, 1992, on a day that had been referred to as Sonic Tuesday by the game's marketing team, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is a platformer and serves as a follow-up to the previous year's original Sonic the Hedgehog. Developed stateside by Sega Technical Institute, the game builds off the foundation laid in its predecessor and shifts the focus of the gameplay more towards fast-paced action, as opposed to slower and more methodical level design. It would go on to become the second best-selling Genesis title just behind Sonic 1, and cemented many of the tropes and defining characteristics of the Sonic franchise through the introduction of things like Miles' Tails Prower, a 7th Chaos Emerald that grants the use of a brand new transformation known as Super Sonic, and the Death Egg, which is literally just a ripoff of the Death Star. As I mentioned back in my Sonic 1 review, I've always been a bit of a Sonic the Hedgehog nut, and I owe a lot of that to playing through this game a lot while I was growing up. In fact, and I'm not all too proud of this, Sonic 1 and 2 are actually among my most frequently bought games. I just couldn't stop buying it for each console it was available on when I was a kid. Anyway, the game got rave reviews back in the day, and is often looked at as one of, if not the best Sonic games from the past 30 years. It's also looked at as a bit of a course correction from some of the quirks found in the original that slowed the gameplay down. But does it hold up? Yeah, it does. Seriously though, at the risk of spoiling my own review, there's almost no denying that Sonic 2 is a classic game. Nor is there any point to denying that it's held up over the years given how many modern re-releases it's gotten. I mean, really, next year's Sonic Origins collection marks the third unique version of Sonic 2 available on the Nintendo Switch alone. And do you know what having 3 copies of the same game on a single console will do to a guy like me? It'll literally drive me insane. So instead of simply dangling that question over your heads for the next 15 or so minutes, I'm simply gonna try and explain my thoughts on why Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is my favorite Sonic game. At least this week. Before we continue though, a quick question of the day. What is one game that you constantly find yourself rebuying for new systems? Besides the obvious answer of Sonic 2, I'd have to go with Borderlands 2. I bought this game at launch for the Xbox 360 and played it multiple times in college on split screen, as well as on PC. I then ended up getting the Xbox One release of the game a few years later, just recently bought the Switch release, and if you count PlayStation Now as having a copy of the game, also have it on my PS5. And yeah, I technically only paid full price for it once, but still, I don't know, I just can't help it. Borderlands 2 is one of my favorite co-op games to play with friends, as well as one of my favorite games to passively play while I listen to YouTube videos or podcasts. Be sure to leave your answer to the question of the day over in the comments. I'd love to hear your answer. And with that out of the way, on with the video. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 takes the basic formula from the first game and quite literally runs with it, expanding on the open and speed-oriented design of Green Hill Zone in order to build a slicker, quicker, and sicker game. It also adapts Sonic into a more versatile character by allowing him to bypass the need to accelerate from a full stop through the inclusion of the spin dash, a technique that allows Sonic to rev up like an engine and immediately take off at full speed. On top of that, the game's Sega Ages release, which, by the way, is what I'm playing for this review, even allows players to take advantage of the drop dash from Sonic Mania. Sonic's new abilities, coupled with the more streamlined and less platform-centric level design, gives Sonic 2 a unique quality that separates it from its predecessor and really makes the game stand out. While Sonic 1 also had zippy and fast-paced gameplay in a few of its zones, the rest of the game was actually relatively straightforward platformer fare. And for the first game in the series, that's totally fine and managed to feel relatively balanced as it eased players into its faster moments. However, Sonic 2 gets straight to business right from its outset, cranking the speed up to 11, the Gene Wilder up to 12, and the psychedelic nightmare fuel up to 1969. The increased speed fulfills all the promise shown in the original, and Sega Technical Institute manages to build an entire game around it here, while also sprinkling a few traditional platforming challenges into each level to keep things from growing too stale. It's a great iteration on the first game's strengths, and is only bolstered by the spin dash. One of the funnest parts of Sonic 1 was picking up a ton of speed in a level like Spring Yard Zone, and then using the momentum generated from that speed to get to hard-to-reach areas. And in Sonic 2, the spin dash basically allows you to pick up enough speed to do stuff like that from nearly anywhere in the game, which leads to the game feeling a lot more like a sandbox for you to explore in any way you'd like. Also new to the game is the inclusion of a new playable character named Miles Tails Prower, a two-tailed fox that can follow Sonic on his adventure to stop Dr. Robotnik. He controls and plays identically to Sonic in this game, and when he's following you around in a normal playthrough can be useful for picking up rings and occasionally getting a bonus hit on an enemy or boss. He can also be controlled by a second player during standard gameplay, which is great for younger siblings or casual players looking to get in on the fun. Oh, and watching him try to land during boss fights can be pretty funny if you don't let him. Like, I don't know, it's just kinda cute. But he can also prove to be a bit of a liability in the later special stages, as having him around can make collecting enough rings to score a Chaos Emerald a lot harder. I'm honestly not really gonna go into the special stages in this review because I've never honestly been one for collecting Super Sonic, which is how you do that, by the way. You collect the Chaos Emeralds, you get Super Sonic. All you really need to know about the special stages is that they revolve around collecting rings in a half-pipe, and that while really visually impressive for something from 1992, they're a total chore to play through thanks to slippery controls and a relatively low draw distance. And for players of more recent, non-direct emulation ports of the game, Sonic 2 also features Knuckles the Echidna from Sonic 3, who's available to players on the original Genesis version of the game too via lock-on technology. No, I said lock-on technology, guys, not locked on. While I've never been a huge fan of Knuckles' gameplay style in general, it's a nice touch that gives seasoned players a new way to approach these levels and get some extra utility out of the game. Plus, Sonic 2's level designs and themes are a huge cut above its predecessor, so there's a good chance that you'll want to run through these levels and explore every nook and cranny of them via multiple playthroughs. Much like in Sonic 1, each of the levels have a distinct theme and level gimmick or two that give them their own unique identity and personality, with the only real exception to this being Hilltop Zone, which is similarly designed to Emerald Hill Zone, which is in itself basically just this game's Green Hill Zone. Many of the game's other zones come across as much more thoughtful though, such as Chemical Plant Zone, Mystic Cave Zone, and one of my personal favorites, Casino Night Zone. Casino Night Zone is, in my opinion, one of the game's greatest moments. Immediately after Aquatic Hill Zone, which has the potential to be one of the slower and more live-stealing sections in the game for players who get trapped in its underwater section and, end up drowning to death. Shit. Gives the players the chance to kick back and relax in a bright and colorful gambling mecca. And because it's casino-themed, there are even straight-up slot machines everywhere that can help players gain a few extra lives for the rest of the adventure. Casino Night is also one of the zones that would go on to have a huge impact on the franchise as a whole, becoming a stage template that's been revisited time and time again across different games, and establishing the idea that slot machines and pinball gimmicks were a good fit for the character. Casino Night Zone and the Las Vegas episode of Rugrats also basically convinced me the gambling was cool as a kid, and I perhaps unfortunately haven't been able to quite shake that idea ever since. However, Sonic 2 isn't perfect. While the game offers numerous improvements over its predecessor, it still falls victim to a few problems that were found in the original game. For starters, while certainly improved from Sonic 1, the game is subject to the occasional hiccup or slowdown. Some parts of the game also feel outright cheap, such as Metropolis Zone, which almost feels like it was straight up plucked out of Sonic 1 and thrown into the game. All of the speedy gameplay up to this point is thrown aside in this level, and huge chunks of the level are spent cautiously trekking through the area, hoping you won't get flanked by hard-to-dodge enemies. And the last level of the game, 2 back-to-back boss battles no less, also feels a little unfair due to that level having a lump sum of 0 rings for you to collect in it. While the battles themselves aren't that bad by any stretch of the word, it does come across as a bit much to ask of the player to complete both of these challenges without any rings. After all, every other level in the game thus far gave the player plenty of opportunities to stock up on rings, which would often come in handy during boss battles for less experienced players. Again, it's not that bad or anything, but it does feel inconsistent with the rest of the game. Overall though, Sonic 2 is leaps and bounds better than its predecessor. The levels all feel a lot more fleshed out than they did the first time around, and the inclusion of Tails is a nice touch, even if he does feel a little under-realized in his first outing. Although despite that, he's still a bean and I still will protect him with all my life. Sonic 2 also manages to build off of the visual strengths found in Sonic 1 to great effect. Whereas that game put the vast majority of its visual effort into the stunningly layered Green Hill Zone, the majority of the rest of that game ended up going easy on the parallax and felt a little flat. Sonic 2, on the other hand, goes out of its way to include multiple layers and dimensions in each of its levels, leading to a world that feels more technically consistent as well as more vibrant and alive. One of the best examples of this enhanced attention to depth is in Aquatic Ruin Zone. The level features lush vegetation in the foreground and masterfully mixes it with the level design and background layers in a way that makes you feel like you're really traversing the ruins of a once great civilization. In fact, one could argue that the level is a bit too layered at points, leading to things feeling cluttered, claustrophobic, and generally hard to read. But outside of that, the game continues to take the design found in Sonic 1 to the next level. The level themes themselves are also more intricate, the color choice is more deliberate and decidedly less 80s, for better or for worse, and the first game's CGI aesthetic is still there, albeit somewhat muted. Except for in Oil Ocean Zone, that is. On a side note, want to know how I can tell this game was developed in America as opposed to Japan? It's because the game dedicated an entire zone to Exxon Valdez. Sonic himself was also slightly redesigned from his first game, and honestly, this is just the canonical way his sprite looks in my head. There's nothing wrong with the way Sonic looked in the first game, nor in the third, I guess, but there's just something about his Sonic 2 look that's... it's perfect. I wouldn't change any of it. The game also goes out of its way to introduce 3D elements into some of the stages, like in the special stages I mentioned earlier, but also in some of the level design for areas like Metropolis Zone, and in the way the characters bounce after you use a spring in Chemical Plant Zone. Masato Nakamura returned for Sonic 2's soundtrack, and with him are several all-time classic Sonic songs. With his second outing as a composer of game music, you can tell that he brought his A-game to the project, as the game's soundtrack feels a lot more varied than what was on display in the first Sonic game. The music flies through several genres this time around and features everything from a waltz in Casino Night Zone, a song that plays off of common Middle Eastern motifs in Exxon Valdez Zone, and straight up sounds like a carnival run amok in Mystic Cave Zone, which is my personal favorite song in the game. And could you blame me? The song sounds straight up sinister at points, and it's almost impossible for me not to sing along to it every time I play through the stage. Pound for pound, I'd say that Nakamura's soundtrack for Sonic 2 generally manages to improve on his work from Sonic 1, in that while none of the songs quite reach the heights of the first game's Green Hill Zone, many of them actually come really close. Sonic 2 would also mark the last time that Nakamura would write original music for a Sonic game, as Sega would set their sights a bit higher for Sonic 3 by enlisting... well, let's not get too ahead of ourselves.
Next time, baby.
What I will say though is that Sonic 2 has one of those game soundtracks that genuinely deserves the praise it gets. It perfectly suits the adventure, it's extremely catchy, and it's as iconic as Sega Genesis music gets. Much like in my Sonic 1 review, if you love the soundtrack to this game, you'd be doing yourself a major disservice by not listening to Nakamura's band Dreams Come True, as their late 80s and early 90s output is very similar to his soundtracks for Sonic 1 and 2. Heck, the melody to Sonic 2's credits theme is even used in their song Sweet 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 from their album The Swinging Star. So does Sonic 2 hold up? Well, yeah, it does. Remember, I said so at the beginning of the video. Sonic 2 proves that the success of the original game was far from a fluke, and in my opinion is the game that fully established the blue blur as a force to be reckoned with. It introduced a number of standbys to the series, such as Tails, Mecha Sonic, and gambling, and it's still every bit as fun as it was back in 1992. While not perfect, Sonic 2 comes pretty close, and the best thing about the game is that it's available on everything from modern consoles to PC, mobile, the Sega Genesis Classic, and if you really hate yourself, the @Games Genesis consoles. So not only is it a great and wonderful game, but it's available literally everywhere, which makes it one of the easiest game recommendations I could ever make. You really can't go wrong with any of the game's re-releases either, as they all either provide acceptable emulation quality, except on the @Games devices, some neat bonus features, or in the case of the mobile ports and the upcoming Sonic Origins collection, straight up widescreen support. Anyway, with that said and done, that brings us to the end of this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you haven't already, feel free to drop an answer to the question of the day over in the comments. You could also leave a recommendation for a game you want to see me review in the future by leaving a comment or by hitting me up on social media. You could follow me on Twitter or Instagram by following the links over in the description or by searching for @NichePlays on those respective sites. So yeah, bye.